You're listening to More Than Steps, the podcast where we geek out on how belly dance works, one coffee run at a time. I'm your hostess, Nadira Jamal. The cold snap here in New England has finally broken, but I still did not go out today because I am not feeling 100%. I have some inner ear stuff going on, and that's given me some vertigo, and walking a straight line is kind of tricky for me right now. So I am still recording this one from home. And today's topic is how to make going back to basics actually work. Now, it's the new year and everybody's thinking about, starting from scratch and what's going to be valuable to them. And hey, go back to the basics is really common advice that you're going to hear. And going back to work on your basics every once in a while really is valuable. But not that many people do it. And the people who do it tend to get bored and give up. And that's a shame because most of our dance is the basics. If you looked at a seasoned pro, especially looking back at the golden era stars, you'll notice that most of what they do are things that you learn in your first year or two of belly dance classes. The difference is that they're doing them with more embodiment, more nuance, more stage presence, and more musicality than a beginner is ready to do. Now, sure, they may sprinkle in some more difficult steps as well, but those are not really the bulk of their dance. And while you might be impressed with those more difficult things are generally not the things that captivate you. So why do people get bored and give up? Well, I think a lot of it is that when people thinking of going back to the basics, what they really think of is picking a move and then repeating the same drills that they learned when they were first learning those moves. And that is not an effective strategy. That's partly true because what challenged you when the material was new isn't going to challenge you now. And that's boring. And also, what helped you improve when that material was new probably isn't going to help you make a noticeable improvement now. And that's demoralizing. So you're sinking all of this time and energy into something that's not improving, so of course you're going to want to quit. So then people think, okay, I'm going to choose some new, harder drills. And that can help you work towards perfecting your technique. But that's not always an effective strategy either when your goal is to be a better dancer. And the reason for that is that perfection is not a core value of belly dance. Now, in ballet, absolutely, but for us, so much of this dance is not whether you have perfect execution, but whether you have something to say, right? The feeling is the most important thing, the musicality. And you do need competent technique. There's no question about that. You need that basic competence in your technique so that you can communicate your artistic vision. And I talked about this a little bit more in a video I did several years ago called Everything Else is Gravy. And the reason that this is a problem in this back to basics context is that once you're already competent, then working towards perfect really produces diminishing returns. You can work really, really hard without seeing much of a difference in the overall quality of your dancing. So yeah, you might perfect your ami or get it, a cleaner hip drop. But when you take a big step back and you look at your dancing, the difference between a competent one of those moves and a perfect one really isn't that big. And that's demoralizing. You work really hard, but you don't see a big overall improvement, and so you get sad and bored, and then you quit working on it. So how can you go back to basics in a useful way? Well, I think the most important thing is to dig deeper. And this falls into three categories. One is to focus on embodying your technique. Instead of trying to make your technique perfect, focus on making it more natural and more a part of your body. Because once you're competent, natural and graceful and effortless seeming execution makes a much bigger impact on your dancing than a perfect execution. Another area that you can look at is expanding your technique. This means building your ability to use your move in new ways, like with level changes, layering it with shimmies, or more opulent arm movements. This is stretching your ability to do it bigger, smaller, faster, slower, in lots of different ways. And this is different from trying to perfect the technique or doing something that's hard for the sake of hard, because when you expand your ability to use that technique in other ways, then it gives you more artistic options. And then the third approach of digging deeper is to look beyond the technique. So yes, you may choose a particular movement to go back to basics on, but instead of thinking about how you execute that movement, you can work on exploring different artistic ideas with it. Try it with different stylizations or embellishments. Try mixing and matching it with other moves in different ways, or applying it to different kinds of music. That's another way of going back to basics to give you a much richer way of approaching those moves, but that isn't simply trying to perfect the movement. All right. Now, one thing that can also help with this process of going back to basics is to try and get help from an outside source. And a great way to do that is to take somebody else's class at a lower level than you would normally take. For example, I had several injuries over the last couple of years, and every time I would come off of physical therapy, I would go to somebody else's beginner class. And I approached that with the intention of just trying to figure out what my body was capable of doing safely. I knew that if I jumped back into advanced classes again, I would be so worried about hurting myself again that I wouldn't really be able to learn anything. But even though I was going to these beginner level classes where I already knew the technique, I was able to pick up on all of these little tiny nuances. With one teacher, it would be how she held her arms. With another, it would be which movements she chose to reflect the music. And if you don't have good options in your local area, there are tons of online classes these days through Powwow and Datura and all kinds of other resources. And another option is that you can work with a beginner level video. And in this situation, I really recommend picking one that has combinations or a choreography in it. Now, I'm an improvisational dancer and I don't do choreography and performance, but learning someone else's material is great for filling the creative well. That's the kind of practice where you're going to start picking up on these nuances from other people rather than just following along with their drills. All right, so let's summarize what we've covered. Going back to basics every once in a while is incredibly useful because the basics are the core of our dance. But if our goal is to grow into better dancers, repeating the same drills we learned the first time around isn't going to improve our technique because we're not challenged. And so our next instinct to choose harder drills to perfect our technique is a bad investment because once we pass the competent point, working on our technique further really has diminishing returns. We'll get better results by digging deeper into those concepts, by working to embody our technique, expand it, or look beyond it. And a great way to get some good ideas is to fill your creative well with other people's beginner level content, whether that's a class, an online class, combos, or choreographies. And if you'd like some help making time to do this practice, my online course, How to Build a Sustainable Practice Habit, is now available in a DIY version. You can get that at bellydancegeek.com/store. And if you enjoy More Than Steps, you can subscribe in iTunes, and I would love it if you left us a review. That helps other people find the podcast, and it helps me out a lot. Thanks for listening, and happy dancing. Thanks for listening. For more geektacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.